I remember the exact moment the lights inside the Harper Atelier Hall seemed to warm the room in that soft golden way that always made my work feel real. People were moving through the space with champagne glasses, touching fabrics on the mannequin displays, murmuring my name as if I were someone worth admiring. I had spent years building this brand in Seattle, pouring every late night and early morning into something that finally felt like it had a heartbeat of its own. It should have been a perfect night, a beginning, a celebration, but all I could think about was Lily. My little sister was standing on the far side of the room near a display of evening dresses, her posture loose and careless, pretending not to notice how many people were trying to get her attention. I knew that posture well. It was her way of pretending she did not care about the world while desperately wanting it to turn toward her. I told myself, just for tonight, she might lower her guard. I had chosen the gift carefully, hoping it would cut through whatever resentment had built between us over the years. I carried the box toward her, feeling the weight of everything it represented. The vintage fabric, the final promise our mother made before she passed in 2010. The hours I had spent stitching the details until my fingers cramped. The hope that maybe this would be the moment we stopped being two women circling the same childhood wound. Lily barely looked at me when I stopped in front of her. Aunt Rosemary stood behind her with that familiar, pinched expression, the one that always made me feel like I was somehow letting the family down, even when I was holding everything together. People around us began to notice something was happening. Phones lowered, conversations paused. A soft hush slid through the space. I held out the box and said her name quietly, telling her I had made something for her. No quotation marks here, just the sound of my own voice trying not to shake. Lily raised her eyebrows as if humoring me and lifted the lid. For a moment, I let myself imagine she might understand, might soften, might remember who made sure she had a bed when we had nothing and who worked 2 jobs so she could finish fashion school. Instead, she pinched the fabric between her fingers and made a face that landed like a slap. She said it was disgusting. Her voice carried farther than she thought. A murmur rippled through the crowd. I felt Aunt Rosemary stiffen behind her, not in shock, but in a way that told me she was already preparing to blame me for this too. Before I could move or process or breathe, Lily turned away from me, walked to the trash bin beside the bar, and dropped the dress inside. The sound was soft, barely a rustle, but it echoed straight through my ribs. The room went silent in a way that felt unnatural. Even the music seemed to lose confidence. I could feel every pair of eyes turning toward me, waiting for me to cry or chase after her or make a scene, waiting for something that would make sense of what they had just witnessed. I stood perfectly still, not because I was composed, but because my body did not know what to do. The moment pressed down on me until I felt like the air might crack. Then I saw Aunt Rosemary step closer to Lily, placing a hand on her arm as if she were the wronged one, as if I had somehow engineered this humiliation. For a second, the old ache returned, the one that came from years of carrying the responsibility of a family that never noticed how heavy it was. But beneath that ache, something else surfaced, quieter but sharper, a kind of clarity that felt almost frightening in its simplicity. I turned away from the trash bin, from Lily, from the growing attention of the guests. I focused on the stage lights, on the fabric displays, on anything that reminded me I had built this world myself, a world Lily had walked into as if it were hers to tear apart. My heartbeat steadied, my breath returned. I felt taller somehow, or maybe just done. Several people approached me at once. A designer from Portland, a buyer from Los Angeles, a journalist holding her phone as if hoping to capture a comment. I smiled at them, the kind of smile that hides everything except resolve. I told them I needed a moment and stepped away from the crowd. Not rushed, not shaken, simply done being humiliated by someone I had protected my entire life. I reached the side door leading to the loading area and slipped outside. The cold air hit my face hard enough to make my eyes sting. I leaned against the brick wall and let myself finally feel the blow of what had happened. Not just the public embarrassment, not just the cruelty of her words. It was the knowledge that everything I had carried for her all these years had meant nothing. Not the rent I paid, not the tuition money I scraped together, not the countless nights I stitched her designs when she was too overwhelmed to finish them, not the promises I kept that she never even noticed. All of it, to her was just something to toss away. I closed my eyes and remembered the last conversation I had with our mother when she handed me the folded piece of fabric that would one day become that dress. She had said in that tired voice of hers that Lily would need something beautiful to remind her she came from love, that she came from us. I wondered what she would think if she saw how that legacy had just been discarded like trash. Inside, I could hear the music rising again as someone tried to restore the energy of the event. It felt distant, like a world I was drifting away from. I stayed outside until the cold settled into my bones in a way that felt clarifying. My phone buzzed repeatedly in my hand, but I did not look. People inside might be worrying or gossiping or pretending they had not seen what happened. Lily was probably already rewriting the story in her head. Aunt Rosemary was probably consoling her, calling me dramatic. But standing there in the cold, I realized something I had not let myself consider before. I did not have to keep cleaning up after her. I did not have to keep holding the weight of a relationship that only existed when she needed something from me. I had built something real with my own hands. I had a life that did not have to revolve around her chaos. And for the first time in years, I felt the ground shift beneath me in a way that suggested everything was about to change. People opened the door behind me, letting a wash of warm light spill into the alley, but I stayed where I was. The night was quiet except for the hum of traffic and the distant applause inside. I took one long breath, steady and unshaken, and let the cold air carry away the last bit of hope that tonight would fix anything between us. When I finally stepped back inside, the lights felt harsher, the crowd louder, and Lily was nowhere in sight. It did not matter. Something had already snapped into place inside me, something that had been waiting years for this exact moment, and I knew, without any hesitation, that I would never let her humiliate me again. I walked farther into the hall, letting the noise swallow me again. But everything felt wrong. The colors looked too bright, the fabrics too polished, the smiles too wide. It was as if the entire room had shifted a few inches away from reality. People tried to meet my eyes with sympathetic half-smiles, and I nodded back as if I had not just watched my sister throw a piece of my mother into a trash can. I slipped behind a column near the back of the hall and took a breath, trying to steady myself. My gaze drifted to the empty runway where the models would walk in less than an hour. Rows of dresses hung backstage, shimmering beneath the soft glow of the overhead bulbs. The sight should have filled me with pride. Instead, all I could see was that one dress missing, the one that should have meant everything. My phone vibrated in my hand. Evan was calling. I stepped into a quiet hallway before answering. His voice came through warm and steady, the way it always had been, even when life around us spun out in impossible ways. He said he had heard something happened. I did not answer right away. It took a moment for my throat to unclench enough to speak. I told him Lily threw the dress in the trash in front of everyone. There was a long silence on his end, the kind that tells you someone is trying to absorb the weight of a thing that should never have happened. He asked if I was all right. I told him I did not know, and it was the truth. He said he was on his way to the venue, but I told him not to. The last thing I needed was someone rushing in to rescue me. I had spent too much of my life being the rescuer, the fixer, the older sister who patched every broken seam. I hung up before he could argue. I walked deeper into the staff hallway until I reached the quiet of the dressing rooms. The hum of lights filled the air, and the smell of freshly steamed fabric wrapped around me. I touched the edge of a garment rack to steady myself. My mind drifted back to 2010 to the small apartment where my mother had folded the vintage fabric into my hands. She had been tired then, fading in that slow way illness steals from you inch by inch. But she still managed to smile as she told me that Lily would need something beautiful someday. Something that came from home, from memory, from love. She had asked me to use that fabric when the time was right. I had promised her I would. I had not known then how heavy a promise could become. I sat down on the edge of a low stool and bent forward, pressing my palms against my knees. The hum of the lights blurred into something softer, almost like my mother's voice. I remembered the afternoons when she guided my hands while teaching me to stitch even seams, the way she moved slowly so I could follow. I remembered her saying that fabric holds stories if you pay attention. Maybe that was why it hurt so much. The dress had held a story, and Lily had thrown it away as if it had never mattered. A soft knock on the dressing room door pulled me out of my thoughts. I looked up as Evan stepped inside anyway, ignoring my earlier protest. He held a garment bag in one hand and looked at me with that steady patience that had always made me feel seen. He asked what exactly happened, and I repeated the scene. My voice stayed flat, almost detached, as if saying it without emotion might make it less true. His jaw tightened. He had helped me work on that dress months ago, had stayed in my studio after midnight while I debated every detail and second-guessed every stitch. He knew better than anyone what it meant to me. He said Lily must have known what it represented. I told him I doubted she cared, but he shook his head and said there were things I did not know, and that Lily had not forgotten the fabric. He reminded me of a day years earlier when Lily came into my tiny studio unannounced and saw me holding the box of vintage cloth. She had asked where it came from. I had told her it belonged to our mother. He remembered the look on her face, a flicker of something like jealousy mixed with confusion. I remembered it too, though I had never wanted to think about it again. Evan said Lily always felt overshadowed, always convinced she was getting whatever love was left over after mine. It sounded absurd to me. I had spent my entire adulthood trying to make sure she had everything she needed. But in families like ours, perception becomes its own truth. And Lily had grown up believing she was the afterthought, no matter how much I gave. I let that sink in. It did not excuse what she had done, but it explained a kind of ache I had never understood. I asked Evan if he thought she had done it to hurt me or to hurt herself. He said sometimes those two things are the same. I stayed quiet after that. The intercom clicked on, announcing that guests were being seated for the show. A rush of distant applause rolled through the building like a wave. I stood up and smoothed my skirt with a shaky hand. The night would go on whether I wanted it to or not. My team needed me. My name was on every wall in this building. I had responsibilities beyond my pain. I walked back toward the main hall with Evan beside me. As we reached the hallway that led to the stage, I saw a cluster of staff whispering among themselves. They fell silent when I approached. One of my assistants, a young woman named Callie, stepped forward and said someone had removed the dress from the trash after I left the room. My breath caught, though I did not know why. I asked who had taken it. She said she did not know. When staff went to clear the bin, the dress was no longer inside. I felt something shift under my ribs. Not hope, not relief, just a strange awareness, like a loose thread pulling on the edge of a larger truth. Before I could think more about it, the show director came running toward me. She said we were minutes from starting. I straightened my shoulders, thanked Evan softly, and stepped onto the wings of the stage. The lights dimmed, the music rose. Models lined up in a clean, precise row, ready to walk the runway. Everything looked exactly as I had imagined it during the long nights leading up to this event. Yet I felt myself standing at a distance from my own dream, as if the night had divided my life into a before and after. I watched the first model step out, the soft glow catching the beadwork in a way that almost brought me to tears. Not the fragile kind, the kind that comes from knowing something inside you has shifted, and there is no going back. I stayed there until the end of the show, clapping along with everyone else, nodding at congratulations, smiling when necessary. On the surface, I was the same woman who had walked into the building earlier that evening, but underneath, in places I had ignored for too long, a quiet decision had already begun to form. The applause faded, the crowd moved toward the exit. The lights brightened as the room returned to normal. I stood near the edge of the runway, surrounded by the dresses that represented years of my life, and I knew I could not pretend anymore. Something had broken open, and whatever came next would not look the same. I walked out of the hall only after the last guest had disappeared into the parking lot. The air outside felt colder than it had earlier, sharper, like it was cutting through the last layer of shock still clinging to me. My heels clicked across the concrete as I headed toward my car, but each step felt strangely distant, as if my body were moving on its own and my mind had fallen a few feet behind. By the time I reached my driveway in Queen Anne, the city lights had settled into that quiet shimmer. Seattle gets after midnight. I went straight inside without turning on the main lights and dropped my keys on the counter. My home had always felt warm to me, filled with the kind of order and calm I never had as a child. But tonight, the silence felt heavy. I stood in the dim light of the kitchen for a moment, breathing in the faint scent of cedar from the candle I had burned that morning. I walked to my office and sat down, not bothering to change or remove my makeup. I opened my laptop, and the familiar glow lit the room. For a few seconds, I just stared at the screen, unsure where to begin. Then my hands moved on their own. I opened the folder labeled Lily. Inside were subfolders for the boutique investments, the loan agreements I had drafted but never enforced, the monthly spreadsheets tracking how much I covered for her whenever she fell behind. There were more documents than I remembered. I clicked through them slowly. Rent receipts showing the payments I had made for her Bellevue shop. Bank transfers from me to her business account. Notes from meetings with her when she had promised to take things seriously this time. Statements showing how I had covered the cost of the training course she swore she needed, but never completed. It felt like scrolling through a record of every moment I had chosen her over myself. The room felt tighter with every file I opened. I had known it was a lot, but seeing it laid out this clearly made my chest tighten. I thought of the dress lying in a trash bin, the years of sacrifice suddenly collapsing into a single image. My phone vibrated beside me. It was Daniel Brooks. It was late, but he answered quickly, his voice steady and alert in that calm way lawyers seem to master. He asked if everything was all right. I told him I needed to talk business. He must have heard the edge in my voice because he stopped asking questions and told me to explain. I told him I wanted to end every financial tie I had with Lily. I wanted everything separated, clean, legal, final. He went quiet for a second, probably surprised to hear me speak with that level of certainty. He asked if I was sure. I said yes. I did not elaborate. There was nothing more to say. He asked for permission to review all agreements related to the boutique, the loan transfers, and the vehicle. I gave it. He promised to start paperwork first thing in the morning, after the call ended. I felt something loosen in my chest, a small release of pressure I had carried for years without noticing its weight. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For so long I had believed my love for Lily required endless sacrifice. I had convinced myself that letting her stand on her own would be abandoning her. But standing outside the venue earlier, staring at the closed trash bin, I had felt something shift. Love was not supposed to feel like drowning. I opened the file marked Vehicle, the Tesla Model X. I had bought it in 2021, telling myself it would give Lily independence while she built her business. She had treated it like her personal badge of success, posting photos as if she had earned it. My name was on the registration, the insurance, the financing. Every payment had come from me. I opened another document, the investment agreement for the boutique. It was supposed to be a shared project in 2019, something we built together, but she had never invested her part, and I had quietly absorbed every cost. My signature sat alone on every line that mattered. I stared at the screen and felt a calm clarity settle over me. I was done. I shut the laptop and stood. The house had grown even quieter, but somehow it felt lighter than when I first walked in. I went upstairs, washed the makeup from my face, pulled my hair back, and changed into a loose sweater. I caught my reflection in the mirror. My eyes looked tired, older somehow, but there was something steadier there too, something I had not seen in years. I lay in bed without turning off the bedside lamp. Sleep did not come for a long time, but the exhaustion felt cleaner than before. Not the overwhelming kind that comes from carrying someone else's weight, but the kind that comes after finally putting it down. I woke before my alarm, a thin gray light pressing through the curtains. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad, jotting down everything that needed to change. My handwriting was uneven at first, then steadier as the list grew. End the boutique investment, transfer the vehicle, close joint accounts, stop covering her rent, redirect energy to my own company. I kept writing until the page was full. By 8:30, I was in Daniel's downtown office. He spread the documents across the table and explained each step. The investment withdrawal would trigger financial consequences for Lily's business, but nothing illegal. The repossession of the Tesla would be simple since the title was entirely in my name. The joint accounts could be closed immediately. Everything could be wrapped within a week. He asked me again if this was what I wanted. I nodded. My voice felt steady, grounded. I signed the first document. That small, deliberate motion felt like cutting the last thread tying me to a version of myself that had been slowly unraveling for years. As I finished, Daniel pushed a final paper toward me, explaining that this would notify Lily formally of the changes. She would receive a copy by certified mail. I imagined her face when she opened it. The confusion, the disbelief, the anger. For years, she had treated my support as something automatic, like it came from a bottomless well. She had no idea how close that well had come to running dry. I tucked the signed documents into my bag and stepped out of the building. The morning air was brisk, carrying the smell of rain and fresh asphalt. Cars rushed along the street below, people hustling to work, the city humming with its usual urgency. For the first time in a while, I felt in sync with it. I got into my car and pulled out slowly, heading toward the boutique. I knew Lily would be there. Her business opened at 11 on weekdays, but she often arrived earlier to prepare for the day. I turned onto the familiar street, past the flower shop with the peeling awning, past the cafe where I used to wait for her when she was too overwhelmed to face her own customers. The boutique came into view. The windows were filled with carefully arranged outfits and accessories, but I knew how much of it was held together by my money. I parked and walked toward the entrance. Inside, the bell above the door chimed. Lily stood at the counter with a half-finished display in front of her. She turned when she heard me. For a moment, she smiled as if nothing had happened. Then she saw my expression, and the smile faded. I walked toward her with the folder in my hand. Her posture shifted defensively. She asked if I was still upset. I told her this was not about last night. This was about years. I placed the papers on the counter and rested my hand on them. Her eyes flicked over the titles. Withdrawal of investment. Termination of financial support. Vehicle transfer notice. She looked up at me, stunned, her mouth parting as if she were about to argue. Then the color rose in her cheeks, and she grabbed the papers with shaking hands, scanning them too quickly to process anything. She said this had to be a joke. I told her it was not. The words tasted final, steady, inevitable. Before she could launch into another accusation or plea, the front door opened, and the landlord stepped inside. He held a clipboard and greeted me politely before turning to Lily with a formal notice. He said the city inspector had flagged her store for a follow-up visit, and he needed access to review compliance. Lily froze, her eyes widening, the papers in her hand trembling. It was the first moment I had seen her scared in a long time. I stepped back, letting the realization settle between us. The life she had propped up on my sacrifices was beginning to. I watched Lily stare at the notice in the landlord's hand, her fingers tightening around the papers as if she could squeeze the words into something less threatening. The color had drained from her face, and for a moment she did not look like the confident woman she tried to present to the world. She looked younger, smaller, the way she used to look when our mother was sick and everything in the house felt unsteady. I felt that old instinct rise in me, the one that pushed me to step between her and any danger. But it stopped halfway, like a reflex that had finally learned a new rule. I did not move toward her. I let the moment sit exactly as it was. The landlord, Vincent, cleared his throat and explained that the city inspector had filed a preliminary report after a drive-by visit. He needed access to check inventory logs, clearance spacing, and safety features. His tone was polite but firm, the kind of voice used by someone who has dealt with too many tenants, avoiding uncomfortable truths. Lily barely heard him. She kept glancing at me, waiting for me to intervene, to smooth things over like I always had. When I did not, she turned back to Vincent with a shaky smile that fooled no one. She said she would cooperate. Vincent nodded once and walked past us toward the back storage area. The moment he disappeared behind the curtain, Lily rounded on me. She gripped the counter so tightly her knuckles whitened. She told me I could not do this to her. Her voice was rising and cracking, and the words came out sharp with fear. I stayed calm and told her the documents spoke for themselves. She said I knew how much she depended on the boutique, how much she depended on the Tesla, how much she depended on me. The last one slipped out before she realized what she was admitting. Her expression flickered with regret, then panic, then anger again. I reminded her that depending on someone is not the same thing as using them. Her eyes flashed. She said I always made myself the hero. I said I did not want to be anyone's hero. I just wanted to stop drowning. She pushed back from the counter and paced the boutique, stepping around the mannequins as if they were obstacles in her mind. She said the timing could not be worse. that she had a collaboration with an influencer coming next week. I told her I knew. She stopped pacing. She looked at me with a sudden suspicion. She asked how I knew. I did not answer, because the truth was simple and painful. I always knew what she was doing. I always carried the background knowledge of her plans because I had been the silent foundation beneath all of them. It felt strange to realize she was just now understanding that. The bell above the door chimed again. Emily walked in with a ring light under her arm and a big smile that faded the moment she saw us. She glanced between Lily and me as if trying to figure out how much trouble she had walked into. Lily rushed to greet her, speaking in a tight, brittle voice. Pretending everything was normal, Emily placed the ring light on the counter and asked if they were still filming the preview segment today. Lily hesitated. I watched the realization dawn on her face. Without the Tesla, without the money, without the certainty she could cover the next rent cycle, everything she had planned was collapsing faster than she could pretend it was not. She turned to me again, desperate. She asked me to wait a week before finalizing anything. She said she needed time to get things sorted. She said she would make the payments on her own. She said a dozen other promises I had heard in a dozen other variations over the years. I listened quietly and did not interrupt. When she finally stopped, I told her I was not postponing anything. Her face went blank, then darkened. She accused me of wanting to see her fail. She said I enjoyed being the powerful one. She said I could make a phone call and fix everything if I wanted to. I let her finish, because interrupting would only make her fight harder. When she finally took a breath, I told her something I knew she did not want to hear. I told her she had been failing for a long time. I had simply stopped cushioning the fall. She swore under her breath and turned away, her shoulders trembling. Emily hovered awkwardly near the accessory shelf, pretending to straighten scarves that did not need straightening. The boutique felt too quiet, like a stage set up for a show no one wanted to perform. From the back room came the sound of Vincent moving boxes. Lily flinched at every thud. She knew what was coming. A follow-up inspection meant paperwork, and paperwork revealed everything she had been avoiding: missing invoices, incorrect inventory values, safety violations. She had run the boutique more like a curated image than a real business. I had known it for years, but I had kept believing she would grow into the responsibility if I just supported her long enough. Support had turned into caring, and caring had turned into enabling. She moved closer to me, lowering her voice. She asked why I hated her. The question hit harder than the accusations before it. I told her I did not hate her. I hated the way we had become stuck in the same loop. I hated the version of myself I had become around her, and I hated watching her throw away every chance she had been given, including the one sown from the last gift our mother left behind. Her eyes flickered at the mention of our mother. For one fragile second, I thought something might shift. But she looked away quickly, shutting whatever emotion had surfaced. Vincent came out from the back, scribbling notes. He said he would send formal documentation after the inspector's visit and left. The door closed behind him with a soft click that felt final. Emily finally spoke, asking Lily if she wanted to postpone filming. Lily snapped that everything was fine, then immediately apologized, then said everything was fine again with a laugh that did not sound like hers. Emily collected her things slowly. She glanced at me once with a sympathetic look, then left without committing to another filming date. The boutique was silent again. Lily sank onto the small velvet bench near the fitting area and held the withdrawal papers in her lap. Her breathing came in fast, shallow bursts. I recognized the look on her face. Panic mixed with disbelief. Panic mixed with a sudden understanding that the world she had built around herself was made of cardboard. I felt the old instinct again, the one that wanted to kneel beside her and soothe her and promise I would fix it. I stayed standing. I reminded myself that comfort had become another form of enabling. She asked what she was supposed to do now. Her voice had lost its sharpness. It sounded like the voice of someone standing in the middle of a room that had just been emptied without warning. I told her the truth. It was time for her to actually run the business she claimed to own. It was time for her to take responsibility. She stared at the floor. The boutique lights reflected off the polished wood near her feet, casting a faint glow around her. For the first time since our mother died, I saw her without my involvement clouding the view. She was not helpless. She was not incapable. She was simply unpracticed at standing without leaning on someone else. I told her I was going to leave so she could gather herself. She did not argue. She did not call after me. She simply sat there, her shoulders rounded inward, holding the papers like they were evidence of something she had tried very hard not to see. I stepped out into the afternoon light. The sky was overcast in that muted Seattle way, soft and gray, promising either rain or nothing at all. I walked toward my car with a steady pace, my mind settling into a strange mix of sadness and resolve. Just as I reached the driver's side door, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The name on the screen made me stop. It was Aunt Rosemary. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. Her voice came through sharp and quivering, full of judgment she did not bother to disguise. She asked what I had done to Lily. She asked why I decided to ruin her life. I leaned against the car and listened. I knew the script. She had used it for years. I let her speak until her accusations became a familiar echo of every burden she had placed on me since I was a teenager. When she finally paused to breathe, I told her Lily's life was her own. I told her I was no longer carrying it. There was silence on the other end of the call, the kind that meant the ground had shifted for her too, even if she would never admit it. I hung up gently and got into the car, letting the quiet settle around me. For the first time since the dress hit the bottom of that trash bin, I felt something that almost resembled space. Not freedom yet, but the room in which freedom might eventually grow. I started the engine and pulled into the street, leaving the boutique shrinking in the rear mirror, aware that whatever came next would not be something I could predict or control. I drove without turning on the radio, letting the sound of the engine fill the quiet that had settled inside me. The farther I got from the boutique, the more a strange stillness wrapped around me, a silence so complete it felt almost unreal. I headed toward Queen Anne again, watching the city move past in muted colors. By the time I parked in my driveway, my phone was buzzing nonstop, but I ignored it. I already knew who it was. Inside, I set my keys down and finally glanced at the screen. 3 missed calls from Lily, 2 from Aunt Rosemary, a string of text messages from numbers I did not recognize. Probably people in her circle demanding explanations. I powered the phone off, not silenced, off. The quiet that followed felt like a small rebellion all on its own. I made tea and sat at the dining table, listening to the late afternoon wind push against the windows. My mind drifted back to the boutique. How Lily had looked when everything she leaned on started to crumble. I felt a pang of something old and familiar, but it faded before it could take root. I reminded myself that pity had become the foundation of all our problems. I had barely finished my tea when my work tablet pinged with a notification. I glanced at the preview and froze for a moment. Someone had tagged Harper Atelier in a video. I opened it without thinking. The screen filled with shaky footage of a tow truck pulling Lily's Tesla out of the parallel space in front of the boutique. People stood on the sidewalk filming. The caption read something sarcastic, asking if all influencers pretended their luxury cars belonged to them. Lily was standing there arguing with the tow truck driver, her voice rising higher with each protest. The driver pointed to paperwork that clearly listed my name as the legal owner. The comments were brutal. I had seen social media go after people before, but never with Lily at the center of it. Strangers calling her fake, a liar, a spoiled child pretending to be a businesswoman. Some comments were from people she knew, people who had always hovered around her when things looked glamorous. They were distancing themselves already. I watched the video twice, not out of satisfaction but something closer to disbelief. For years, I had been the invisible scaffolding behind her curated image, and now that the support was gone, it took only a few hours for the facade to collapse. My tablet pinged again, another video. Someone had recorded the boutique's front window earlier, with a notice from the city inspector taped to the glass. It mentioned pending review. Someone in the comments asked why a boutique needed safety inspections. Someone else speculated money issues. The more I scrolled, the harsher the dialogue became. I turned off the screen and leaned back in my chair. My emotions were tangled in a way I did not quite know how to sort through. There was no joy in watching her fall apart. There was no vindication either, just a tired ache, and under that, a faint flickering sense that something inevitable had finally begun. I stood and walked to my studio, opening the door to the room that always grounded me. The smell of fabric, thread, and warm light settled around me like a blanket. I let my fingers brush the edge of a dress form. Creating things had always made sense. People rarely did. My thoughts drifted back to the night of the fashion show. The dress Lily had thrown away. The missing dress no one could account for. For a moment, I wondered if someone from staff had removed it out of kindness, thinking I should not have to see it again, or if someone had taken it for a less innocent reason, or if Lily herself had gone back for it. I pushed the idea away before it could root. I spent the next hour sketching aimlessly, letting lines form shapes that had nothing to do with the collection I was working on. My mind kept circling the same point. There would be consequences for Lily. Real ones, the city inspection, the rent, the lost investors, the collapse of her online persona. I wondered if she understood any of it yet, or if she was still telling herself that I was the problem. My phone buzzed again from the other room, then stopped. Silence followed. Then it buzzed again. Something in the rhythm of it felt different this time. Reluctantly, I went to check it. It was not Lily. It was Sophie from my company. She sent a short message saying I should check the trending page on social media. My stomach tightened. I opened the link she sent. A third video was circulating, this time recorded inside a nearby cafe. A couple of customers were talking about the scene outside the boutique earlier. Their voices were casual but dismissive as they talked about Lily losing her car, her shop being in trouble, her image falling apart. One of them made a comment that Lily was never the real talent in the Harper family, that everything she touched had Maddie behind it. The comment thread was already filled with speculation, people guessing what had gone wrong, people digging through Lily's old posts, people questioning her claims about her achievements. It was the kind of internet feeding frenzy that moves fast and leaves nothing untouched. I set the phone down slowly. This was spreading faster than I expected, faster than she could control. And for the first time, I realized Lily was about to face something she had never dealt with before, a world she could not manipulate with charm or filters or borrowed things. The room felt colder. I pulled a sweater over my shoulders and walked to the window. Seattle's sky had deepened into that pale lavender tone that comes before dusk. People passed on the sidewalk below, their movements calm and unaware of the storm unraveling in someone else's life. My phone buzzed again. This time, when I looked, it was a text from a mutual acquaintance. They asked if Lily was all right. They had seen the videos. They thought she looked lost. They said she told them once that I was the only person she trusted, even when she acted like she did not need me. I let the phone fall to my side. I did not know what to do with that information. Trust had always been a fragile thing between us, and she had shattered mine more times than I could count. But hearing that she had said something kinder to someone else than she ever said to me made my throat tighten. I returned to the dining table and sat again. I poured myself another cup of tea and held it between my palms. The warmth seeped through my fingers. I stayed like that for a while, breathing in slow, steady rhythms, letting the noise of the world fade to a low hum. When the sun finally slipped behind the rooftops and the streetlights blinked on, my phone buzzed once more. This time, it was a voicemail notification from Lily. No text, no missed call, just the recording. For a moment, I considered deleting it without listening, but then I pressed play. Her voice was unsteady, almost breaking. She said she did not know what to do, that everything was falling apart, that she felt like she was drowning. She said she knew I was angry, and she deserved it, but she begged me to call her back. She said she was scared. The message ended abruptly, as if she had run out of words. I set the phone down. My heart felt heavy in a way that tugged at old memories, the kind that came from being the older sister who had always stepped in, always fixed things, always picked her up when she stumbled, but I stayed seated. I did not rush for my keys. I did not pick up the phone. I did not move toward the instinct that had ruled my life for too long. The night deepened outside, the quiet stretched, and I stayed there, letting the weight of her voice settle into the room without deciding what to do next. I sat there for a long time after the voicemail ended, letting the last tremor of Lily's voice fade into the room until it felt like silence again. My tea had gone cold. The daylight had drained out of the windows, leaving only the dim glow of the street lamp outside stretching across my kitchen floor. I could have stayed in that chair all night, suspended between the past and whatever future waited for us. But stillness never lasts with me. My thoughts eventually began to gather themselves, circling the same point until I could no longer ignore it. I needed help. Not the kind people ask for in emergencies, but the kind that rewrites the worn-out patterns inside you. So the next morning, I drove to Capitol Hill for my appointment with Nora Jacobs, the therapist I had been seeing off and on for the past 6 months. She had warm eyes and a way of listening that made you feel as if your thoughts were being laid out neatly instead of tangled together like threads from a ruined hem. The waiting room smelled faintly of eucalyptus. Soft music drifted from somewhere unseen. When Nora opened the door to her office, she greeted me with a small nod and stepped aside for me to walk in. I sat in my usual chair, a deep blue one angled slightly toward the window. She took her seat opposite me and waited. She never rushed. I told her about the fashion show, the dress, the trash bin. The silence afterward that felt like a wound you could not see. She listened without interruption. When I finally paused, she asked what part of the night hurt the most. I tried to answer, but the words did not come out smoothly. I told her it was not the public humiliation itself. I had been embarrassed before. I could live with that. What hurt was the moment Lily looked at the dress and saw nothing. Nothing of what I had put into it. Nothing of who it came from. Nothing of who I had been to her. Nora leaned forward slightly, her voice soft. She asked if I knew what parentification meant. I said yes, at least in theory. She waited again, letting the idea settle. She told me that sometimes the oldest child becomes the caretaker long before they are ready. They become the emotional and practical backbone of the family, filling roles they were never meant to fill. It is a type of responsibility that can feel like love when you are young, but becomes something heavier as you grow older. She said I had been holding that weight for so long that I could not separate duty from affection. The words hit a place inside me that I had not touched in years. I felt a tightness rise in my throat. My hands twisted together in my lap. She asked me what I thought would happen if I stopped carrying the weight. The question unsettled me. I told her the truth. I said I was afraid Lily would fall apart. She nodded, then asked me something I was not expecting. She asked why I believed Lily had the right to fall apart in my hands instead of her own. I stared at her for a long moment. The room seemed quieter, as if the air was listening too. I had spent so many years thinking it was my job to make sure Lily did not break, that it had never occurred to me that the breaking was not mine to fix. That maybe she needed to face the consequences of her choices to grow past them. Nora asked if I had listened to the voicemail. I said yes. She asked what I felt. I told her I felt pulled in 2 directions. One part of me heard the frightened version of Lily, the little sister who needed me. The other part heard the grown woman who had thrown a dress made from our mother's last memory into a trash bin because it did not fit the image she wanted to project. That conflict sat inside me like 2 opposing truths that refused to blend. Nora said that both could be real at the same time. That Lily could be hurting and I could still hold my boundary. That compassion did not mean carrying someone. That love did not mean losing yourself. Her voice was steady, but not stern. She was not warning me. She was handing me a key to a door I had never opened. I sat in silence for a moment, trying to imagine my life without the constant pressure of making sure Lily stayed afloat. I thought of all the times I left work early to help her, all the money I moved around quietly so she would not feel embarrassed, all the nights I lay awake worrying about her bills, her moods, her choices. My life had been built around managing her turbulence. It was strange to realize how much space existed beyond that. I told Nora about the videos spreading online. She nodded as if she had expected something like that to happen. She asked if I felt guilty. I did not answer at first. Eventually, I admitted that some small part of me did. Not because I wanted to fix it, more because watching someone you love fall is never easy, even when you know the fall is necessary. She asked what guilt usually made me do. I said it made me rescue. She asked if rescuing had ever changed anything. I laughed then, a short, tired sound. I said no, it never had. When the session ended, I stepped outside into the late morning air and felt an unusual clarity settle over me. The sun was breaking through the usual Seattle cloud cover, lighting the street in soft gold. People passed by with coffee cups and backpacks, going about their lives. For the first time in a long time, I felt separate from the chaos, not detached, just separate. like my life had its own perimeter I could protect if I chose to. I walked slowly to my car. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I got inside and sat behind the wheel, breathing in the faint scent of lavender from the air freshener. The city hummed around me. For once, it felt like a hum I did not need to match. A thought came to me then, not sharp, but steady. If I wanted to stop the cycle, I had to stop participating in it. Traffic was light as I turned onto the main road. I took my time driving home, letting the session settle inside me. Halfway across the bridge toward Queen Anne, my phone buzzed again. I reached for it out of habit but caught myself. I let it ring. By the time I reached my house, the buzzing had stopped. I went inside and placed the phone on the counter without turning it over to see the notifications. I made myself lunch, washed the dishes slowly, listened to the sound of water running over porcelain. Every motion felt deliberate, grounding. When I finally picked up the phone, there were 4 missed calls from Lily, 1 from Aunt Rosemary, 2 texts from acquaintances who had seen the latest online chatter, and 1 number I did not recognize. A voicemail icon blinked. I hesitated, then pressed play. It was Lily again. Her voice was softer this time, less frantic but painfully fragile. She said the landlord had come back. She said the inspector was scheduling a full visit. She said the influencer partnership had fallen apart. She said people were turning on her online. Somewhere in the middle of her message, her voice cracked. She said she did not know how things had gotten so far out of control. The message ended with a quiet question. She asked if I hated her. I sat at my kitchen counter, the phone still warm in my hand. I closed my eyes. There it was again, the familiar pull, the instinct to rush in. But I stayed exactly where I was. The sun began its slow descent through the clouds, casting a pale glow across the room. My house was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I breathed in and let the air settle in my lungs. The day was not over, and there were still truths waiting to be faced. I stayed very still for a few minutes after the message ended, letting the quiet settle again before I stood and carried my phone into the living room. The light outside had shifted into that soft, washed-out gray that Seattle gets in late afternoon, a sky that never decides if it wants to rain or finally let the sun in. I sat on the couch and placed the phone face down beside me. I was afraid to pick it up again, not because of Lily, because of what hearing her voice always did to me. It pulled at the oldest version of myself, the one that believed my worth lived in how tightly I could hold her life together. I closed my eyes and rested my head against the back of the couch. I thought of the dress again, the way she had looked at it with disdain as if it were nothing. I thought of my mother folding the fabric in her fading hands. I thought of all the years in between, all the nights I had pushed my own life aside to steady hers. It felt like standing on the edge of something that had taken years to reach, and now all I had to do was not step backward. A soft tapping at my door made me sit up. I was not expecting anyone. I hesitated, then opened it a crack. Sophie stood on the porch with a windbreaker pulled tight around her and a worried look on her face. She lifted her hand in an awkward little wave when she saw me. She said she had tried calling but figured I might not be answering. I let her inside. She brushed rain from her sleeves even though it had not rained, an old nervous habit of hers. She sat at the kitchen island while I filled the kettle. She said the videos of the tow truck had been circulating all morning and that people at the office were whispering about it. She said some were angry on my behalf, some confused, some concerned. I appreciated her honesty. I appreciated even more that she did not start the conversation with advice disguised as comfort. When the tea was ready, she wrapped her hands around the mug as if gathering warmth. She asked how I was holding up. I told her I was not sure yet. She nodded slowly. She said she had always admired how steady I was, but she also wondered if maybe steadiness had sometimes stopped me from allowing anything to fall apart that needed to. I let out a tired laugh. I told her my therapist had said something similar. She smiled faintly. She asked what I planned to do about Lily. I shook my head. I did not know. And for the first time, I did not feel ashamed of not knowing. Before she left, she placed a hand on my forearm in a gesture that felt both gentle and grounding. She told me she trusted that whatever I chose next would come from a place of clarity, not fear. After she walked down the steps and disappeared into the street, the house felt quiet again, but not the heavy kind of quiet I had felt earlier, more like a pause, I moved to my office and opened my laptop, intending to distract myself with work. But before I could pull up any files, a new notification appeared on the corner of the screen. It was another video. My stomach tightened as I clicked the link. This one had been recorded outside the boutique about an hour earlier. A few neighbors had gathered, talking loudly enough that their voices carried clearly through the microphone. They were speculating about why the city was inspecting the shop again. One man said he always knew the place was not organized right. A woman said she had heard Lily was behind on her rent. Someone else mentioned that Harper Atelier had distanced itself from the boutique years ago, and maybe there was a reason for that. I watched Lily step outside during the recording. She looked tired, her hair pulled back in a messy way that did not suit her usual polished presentation. One of the customers from next door asked if everything was all right. Lily gave a thin smile and said she was handling it. But the shake in her voice was impossible to ignore. The comment section below the video was even worse. People were arguing, spreading rumors, defending or attacking her. Social media moves quickly, quicker than any person can keep up with. Once a story catches the wrong kind of wind, it becomes its own storm. I closed the browser and leaned forward, my elbows on the desk, hands pressed against my forehead. This was the part I had not planned for. I had known withdrawing support would have consequences. I had not expected the fallout to become a spectacle. The public nature of it twisted something in my chest. Lily had humiliated me publicly, yes, but watching her unravel this way did not bring the satisfaction some people might imagine. It only made everything feel heavier. My phone buzzed again. For a moment I considered ignoring it, but something in my gut nudged me. I picked it up. A text from an old family friend named Marlene. She had seen the videos and wanted to check on me. She said she hoped I was not blaming myself for any of it. She said she remembered how much I had carried after our mother died and how Lily had always leaned harder than she should have. She reminded me that letting go is sometimes the only act of love left. I stared at those words for a long moment. Only act of love left. I was not sure if it was true, but it felt close to something I needed to hear. Evening settled into the house with that slow creeping dimness Seattle is known for. The sky was a blue-gray smudge behind the windows. I warmed up leftovers and ate without tasting anything. I washed dishes, straightened the living room, folded a blanket on the back of the couch. Each small action felt like clearing a space in my mind, making room for something new to form. When I returned to the table with a fresh cup of tea, my phone buzzed again. I almost set it aside but stopped when I saw the caller ID. It was a number I recognized yet rarely saw. Aunt Rosemary. I considered letting it go to voicemail. Something told me to answer. Her voice was sharp from the moment I said hello, filled with emotion she did not bother to soften. She demanded to know why I had let things get this far. She said Lily was devastated and that I needed to fix this before real damage was done. She said family does not walk away from each other. I let her speak until her words began weaving the familiar tapestry of guilt and obligation she had sewn around me since I was a teenager. When she paused to breathe, I asked her something I had never asked before. I asked why she was angry with me for letting Lily stand on her own when she was a grown woman with full control over her choices. There was a long silence. She seemed genuinely stunned. She said Lily was fragile and could not handle pressure. I said fragility was not a reason to avoid responsibility. She said I had always been the strong one. I said strength does not mean endless endurance. She began to raise her voice again, but I cut in gently, something I had never done to her. I told her I loved my sister, but I could not keep sacrificing myself to prevent her from facing the consequences of her own actions. The silence that followed was deeper than before. I could almost hear her adjusting to the new shape of who I was becoming. She finally said she hoped I knew what I was doing. Her tone was not approving, but it was not quite condemning either. She hung up without a goodbye. I set the phone down and exhaled slowly. Something in me felt steadier. Something felt released. The sky outside had darkened fully now. Lights from neighboring houses glowed against the deepening night. I walked to the window and rested my hand against the cool glass. The street was quiet except for the occasional passing car. I thought of Lily again, the panic in her voice, the fear beneath the anger, the way she had asked if I hated her. I did not hate her. I hated the years we had both lost to the imbalance between us. I hated that our mother's legacy had become a wound instead of a memory. I hated that I had allowed her needs to overshadow my own life for so long. But hate was not the foundation of what came next. Something else was forming beneath it. Something quieter and more certain. The night deepened and the house settled around me. I stood at the window until the street emptied entirely, held there by the strange combination of sorrow and resolve that had become my constant companion. And then, without warning, another thought surfaced, the kind that arrives with the weight of truth. It was time to let the next part of her journey unfold without my hands on it. I woke the next morning with a tightness behind my eyes, the kind that comes from a night spent thinking instead of sleeping. The house was dim and quiet, filled with the pale blue light that slid across the floor just before sunrise. I sat up slowly, letting the heaviness settle before I stood and padded toward the kitchen. The coffee maker hummed to life, sending a thin ribbon of steam into the air. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug and let the quiet anchor me. As I sipped, my phone buzzed with a text. It was from Evan. He said he had been worried since the show and asked if I was free to talk sometime today. I stared at the message, feeling a small flicker of comfort. Evan had always been a steady presence in my life, even when I did not realize I needed one. Before I could respond, another text came through. This one from Lily. She asked if we could meet. Just that. 5 words, no explanation, no accusations, no frantic tone. Something about the simplicity unsettled me more than the panicked messages from the night before. I set the phone down without responding. I needed time to think. By mid-morning, after answering emails from my team and reviewing some early sales numbers from the show, I finally texted Lily back. I asked where she wanted to meet. She suggested a small cafe in Tacoma, one we had gone to years ago when she was still in school. It struck me as an odd choice, but I agreed. The drive would give me time to gather myself. The sky was a dull, heavy gray as I headed south. The trees flashed past in dark silhouettes. My thoughts shifted between memories that hurt and ones that felt distant enough not to sting anymore. When I reached the cafe, I sat in the parking lot for a moment, breathing in through my nose and out through my mouth until my heartbeat steadied. Inside, the cafe smelled of roasted coffee beans and cinnamon. Everything was warm wood and soft lighting. Lily sat at a corner table near the window, her shoulders hunched forward, her fingers wrapped around a steaming cup. She looked up when I approached. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face pale in a way that worried me more than I wanted to admit. I sat across from her. Neither of us spoke at first. The barista's soft chatter mixed with the clinking of dishes in the background. Lily finally lifted her gaze and thanked me for coming. Her voice was small, almost fragile. I told her she asked. So I came, nothing more. She nodded slowly as if accepting terms. She said she knew everything was falling apart. She said she knew some of it was her fault, and some of it felt bigger than anything she had the tools to handle. I waited. I did not want to fill the silence with the same reassurances I had given all my life. She picked at the edge of a napkin, tearing it into tiny strips. She said she wished she could replay the night of the show. She said she wished she had just looked at the dress and remembered what it represented instead of reacting like a child who did not know how to manage her own feelings. Her eyes filled with tears, she blinked away quickly, as if embarrassed by the vulnerability. I listened. She kept talking. She said she had always felt like she was standing in my shadow, even when I did not try to cast one. She said she never knew how to live up to the version of me that everyone else seemed to admire. She said she had been jealous, not because I succeeded, but because I seemed so sure of myself in ways she felt she could never be. There was a pause. She breathed in again, shakier this time. She said that when she opened the dress, she had felt something ugly twist inside her, something she had never wanted to acknowledge. It was not disgust at the fabric. It was the fear that she had already failed before she even began. That the gift was a reminder of everything she wished she could be but was not. I felt something inside me loosen but not break. I asked her why she had thrown it in the trash then. She looked down, tears spilling this time. She said she panicked. She said she tried to shock me before I saw how scared she truly was. She said she wanted control, even if the only control she could grasp came from destroying something I cared about. I exhaled slowly, letting the weight of her confession settle. I told her fear was not an excuse. She nodded, wiping her cheeks with the back of her hand. She said she knew that. She said she was not asking for forgiveness yet. She said she just wanted to tell the truth. The door of the cafe opened with a soft jingle. Evan walked in, holding a portfolio under his arm. I was surprised to see him, but he spotted us quickly and came over. He apologized for interrupting. Lily shook her head and said it was all right. He sat down beside me and placed the portfolio on the table. He looked at Lily with an expression that held both concern and something like relief that she was finally confronting the truth. He asked her if she was ready for what he brought. She frowned and asked what he meant. He opened the portfolio and slid out a worn sketch, edges frayed from years of being handled. My breath caught in my throat. It was my mother's drawing, the one she had made before she died, the dress design, the original version with 2 pieces. Not one for me, one for Lily, a shared symbol, not a single inheritance. I looked at Evan, stunned. He said he had kept the sketch all these years because my mother had asked him to help me finish the second piece when the time came. She said both her daughters deserved something from her, and she had not wanted Lily to feel left out. Lily stared at the sketch with her mouth slightly open. Tears welled again, heavier than before. She whispered that she never knew. Evan said she had not been ready then, and maybe not ready until now. A long silence hung between us. Outside, a car passed, its tires whispering across wet pavement. Inside, the barista laughed softly at something a customer said. Everything felt distant, like we were sitting in a pocket of time, separate from the rest of the world. Lily finally spoke. Her voice was hoarse, but honest. She said she was sorry, not just for the dress, for years of resentment she had let grow inside her, for letting jealousy cloud her vision, for expecting me to hold her life together while she sabotaged her own chances. I listened, letting her words seep in without rushing to absolve her. When she finished, she looked at me as if she were bracing for a punishment she feared she deserved. I told her I was glad she told the truth, but I also said the damage was real, and healing would not come from a single conversation. She nodded, tearful but understanding. She said she needed to learn to handle things herself now. She needed to grow up. She needed to stop expecting me to fix everything she broke. I believed her. At least, I believe she believed it. The 3 of us sat quietly for a while, the sketch lying between us like a small bridge. I traced the lines with my eyes, remembering the way my mother drew, slow and steady, each stroke infused with intention. I stood after a few minutes and said I needed air. Lily wiped her face and let me go without asking me to stay. Evan remained at the table with her. I stepped outside into the cool Tacoma air. Clouds had opened just enough to let a soft wash of sunlight spill through, lighting the tops of the cars and the leaves of the nearby trees. I breathed in deeply, letting the crispness settle in my chest. Something had shifted, not repaired, not resolved, but shifted, like a tight knot loosening one thread at a time. I looked through the window and saw Lily still holding the sketch. Her shoulders curled around it protectively. She looked like someone who had finally begun to see herself clearly for the first time. I stood there on the sidewalk, letting the quiet moment stretch, knowing the next step would matter even more than everything that had come before. I stayed on the sidewalk until the sunlight thinned again behind the clouds, watching the shapes of people move inside the cafe like blurred silhouettes through the window. Lily was still holding the sketch in her lap, her shoulders curling inward as if she were trying to protect something fragile. Evan was speaking, his hands resting on the table, his posture calm in a way that had always grounded her. For a moment, I saw what we might have been if life had shaped us differently. 2 sisters growing side by side instead of one growing upward and the other folding inward. The thought lingered, then drifted away as lightly as the wind brushing past me. I finally walked back inside. Lily looked up, eyes still red but clearer than I had seen in months. She said she understood if I needed time. I nodded, because the truth was I needed more than time. I needed distance. I needed boundaries that neither of us had ever practiced before. We exchanged a few more words, quiet and careful. Then we stepped outside together. Evan said he would stay behind to close out our tab and give us a moment alone. Lily and I walked toward the small parking lot in front of the cafe. The asphalt was still damp, reflecting the washed-out sky in shallow puddles. A breeze tugged at Lily's loose hair. She hugged the sketch to her chest like it was a wound she finally recognized as her own. She said she knew things were not going to go back to normal. I told her normal had never really existed for us. She nodded, and for once she did not try to argue. She asked if we could meet again soon, not to fix anything, but to talk. I said we could. I did not promise anything more. We parted with a quiet goodbye. She climbed into a rideshare she had scheduled earlier, and I watched the car pull out of the parking lot until it turned onto the main road and disappeared behind a delivery truck headed north. When Evan stepped outside, he held the portfolio under his arm. He asked if I was all right. I told him I thought so. He looked at me the way someone looks when they see both the strength and the exhaustion in you at the same time. He asked if I wanted company for the drive back. I said no. I needed to sit with things on my own. We walked to our cars together, talking lightly about the weather and upcoming projects at the atelier, both of us avoiding the heavier things still hovering in the air. Before we parted, he touched my elbow gently and told me he was glad Lily finally saw the truth behind the dress. I felt something warm stir inside me, something like relief that the burden of that secret no longer lived only in my chest. The drive back to Seattle was quiet. I watched the landscape change as Tacoma's older brick buildings gave way to the open stretch of highway that rose and fell with the curves of the land. The sky was a mix of faint sunlight and low-hanging clouds, shifting between brightness and shadow the way my thoughts did. When I reached home, I set my bag on the entry table and walked through the living room slowly, letting the familiarity of my space steady me. I changed out of my coat and sat at the edge of my bed, feeling the soft dip of the mattress beneath me as if it were an invitation to rest. But my mind did not settle. Instead, it replayed every moment of the morning, Lily's confession, the sketch, the tremor in her voice when she said she had been scared, the way she looked at me not with anger, but with something closer to understanding. I lay back and stared at the ceiling, letting the weight of all of it sink in. I had imagined so many conversations with her over the years, most of them filled with blame or disappointment or pleas for help. I had not pictured one where she admitted her own resentment so openly. I had not imagined her asking for nothing and everything at the same time. I did not know how long I lay there, caught between reflection and exhaustion, when my phone began to buzz again. This time, the sound made my heart tighten. I considered ignoring it, but something nudged me. I reached for the phone. It was a notification from Harper Atelier, a message from the events director reminding me of the upcoming industry showcase next month. It would be one of our largest shows since the rebranding 2 years ago. Designers, investors, press, buyers from across the coast, a high-profile moment. I sat up slowly, the thought forming with a clarity that surprised me. If Lily truly wanted to start again, if she wanted to face what she had broken, if she wanted to step out from behind the mess she had made, there would be no better place to do it than on a stage that once held our mother's legacy. The idea lingered, not as a decision but as a possibility. Evening crept toward the windows as I moved through the house, turning on lamps, letting the warm light soften the corners of every room. I made myself dinner and ate in silence, my mind drifting between the past and an uncertain future that did not feel as heavy as it once had. After washing the dishes, I settled on the couch with a blanket over my legs. The quiet hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of wind outside made the room feel gentler than it had in days. I reached for my phone again. A text from Lily appeared at the top of the screen. She said thank you for meeting her. She said she understood if it would take time for me to trust her again. She said she hoped I would. I stared at the words. Slowly, I typed a short reply. I told her it was a beginning, nothing more, nothing less. I set the phone aside and closed my eyes. My body felt tired in a deep way, but not the kind that comes from carrying someone else's weight. More the kind that comes after laying it down. Sometime later, I must have drifted into a light sleep because I woke to the soft buzz of another message. This time it was from Sophie. She attached a link. I opened it, half expecting another video of Lily, but it was not that. It was a promotional draft for the upcoming industry showcase. Sophie asked if I approved the layout. I scanned the flyer. The theme for the event was renewal. A single word at the top of the page, framed by soft watercolor graphics in pale gold and deep green. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Renewal. It felt almost too fitting. Something shifted inside me then. A quiet recognition that the story was not finished yet. Not for me, not for Lily, not for the piece of our mother that still lived in the folds of that missing dress. I set the phone down and let out a breath I had been holding without realizing it. My house was quiet, the city outside settling into the stillness of night, The air felt lighter somehow, as if something in the world had finally begun to move in a direction I could not name yet but recognized all the same. And as I sat there, listening to the quiet settle into the walls around me, I understood that whatever happened next would ask something different of both of us. Something honest. Something that might finally let the past loosen its grip. The night pressed a little deeper into the windows, and I let the stillness gather, knowing the next turn was waiting just beyond it. I sat there for a long time, letting the quiet fold around me like a soft blanket, until the heaviness in my chest shifted into something calmer. Renewal. That word echoed in my mind long after the phone screen dimmed. I did not know whether the universe was nudging me, or whether I was finally ready to hear something I had ignored for years. Either way, the idea that had begun to take shape earlier in the day moved closer to the surface. The industry showcase arrived 3 weeks later. The days leading up to it were filled with planning, fittings, last-minute fabric delays, and the usual rhythm that came with preparing a major event. My team moved through the atelier with practiced confidence, their voices rising and falling in a pattern that steadied me even when my thoughts drifted toward Lily more than I wanted to admit. She had been quieter since our meeting in Tacoma. Not silent, just less frantic. Her messages were deliberate and respectful. Small updates about the boutique inspection, her efforts to restock inventory, her conversations with vendors she once ignored. She was trying, I could see that. But I kept my responses short. Encouraging, but not enabling, supportive, but not involved. It was the hardest balance I had ever tried to hold. The night of the showcase. I arrived early at the venue, a large open hall near the waterfront with high rafters and floor-to-ceiling windows that caught the fading sunset. The team had transformed the space into something warm and glowing. Soft gold lights shimmered across the runway and reflected off the metallic accents woven into the new collection. Renewal. The theme felt etched into every detail. Guests arrived slowly at first, then all at once. Designers, buyers from Los Angeles and Portland, fashion journalists, investors, even a few celebrities known for supporting sustainable fashion. People approached me with congratulations and questions, and I let their enthusiasm carry me through the early part of the evening. But beneath it all, a quiet nervousness threaded through me. I kept glancing toward the entrance. When the lights dimmed and the announcer introduced the collection, the room fell into a hush. Models stepped out in measured rhythm, each piece telling its own story as they moved along the runway. I felt a swell of pride, the kind that blooms deep inside and rises slow. Harper Atelier had once been just an idea in my mind, a place where craft and memory intertwined. Seeing it thrive still humbled me. About 20 minutes into the show, my gaze drifted toward the far side of the audience. That was when I saw her. Lily stood near the aisle, wearing a simple black dress that contrasted sharply with the glamour around her. She held a small box in her hands. Her posture was stiff, but her eyes met mine with something I could not quite name. I had agreed to let her speak at the end of the show, but seeing her there sent a ripple of emotion through me so strong I had to steady my breath. I nodded to her slightly. She nodded back. The final model walked the runway in a flowing emerald gown, inspired by the Puget Sound's shifting colors. When she disappeared backstage, the lights softened again. Applause filled the room, warm and full. I stepped forward, gave my thanks, spoke briefly about the theme of renewal and the importance of honoring craft and growth. As I wrapped up, I saw Sophie give me a small nod from the side stage. It was time. I turned and gestured toward Lily. Conversations in the room dimmed as people realized who she was. She walked toward me slowly, holding the small box with both hands as if it carried something delicate. When she reached the center of the stage, she paused, breathed in deeply, then faced the audience. Her voice trembled at first, but it steadied as she continued. She said many people in the room knew her as my sister, and some only knew her from the videos circulating online. She said she wanted them to know the truth, not the curated version, not the dramatic version, but the real one. She spoke about the dress, about throwing it away, about the jealousy she had nurtured quietly for years. She admitted to letting pride swallow her gratitude. She admitted to letting insecurity turn into blame. She said she had hurt me deeply and publicly, and the consequences that followed had not been punishments from me, but the natural fallout of her own choices. The room was still, not tense, just listening. Then she opened the small ball and lifted out the dress I had thought was lost forever. It had been pressed and cleaned, though a few faint wrinkles remained. She held it up to the light and said she had taken it from the trash that night after everyone had left, because she could not bring herself to let go of it entirely. She said she had kept it tucked away, unable to look at it, unable to forget it. Her voice cracked when she said she finally understood what it meant. Not the fabric, not the design, the legacy, the love stitched into it long before either of us were old enough to name it. She turned toward me then, holding the dress out like a fragile truth. She said she was sorry, not because she wanted anything from me, not because she expected forgiveness, but because she finally saw me. She finally understood the weight I had carried and the love I had never stopped offering. My throat tightened. I stepped forward and accepted the dress from her hands. The fabric was lighter than I remembered, or maybe I was simply stronger now. I leaned toward the microphone and told the audience that forgiveness is not a door that swings open easily. It is a slow hinge, one that creaks and resists and requires honesty on both sides. I said I was proud of the work Lily had begun to do, proud of the woman she was trying to become, but I also said I was no longer her foundation. If we moved forward, it would be as two people standing on their own feet, not savior and dependent, not rescuer and rescued, just sisters learning how to begin again. Lily nodded, tears tracing soft lines down her cheeks. She stepped forward and hugged me. This time it felt real, unburdened by expectation or guilt. Just the quiet recognition of two lives finally unraveled enough to start weaving themselves back together properly. The audience rose in applause, not thunderous or dramatic, but warm, genuine. The kind of applause that wraps around you more than it echoes. Later that night, after the crowd had dispersed and the runway lights had dimmed, I stood alone on the stage holding the dress. The hall was quiet except for the faint hum of the ventilation system. I traced the seams with my fingers and let the moment settle deep inside my chest. Renewal. The word had never felt so fitting. When I finally walked outside, the night air greeted me with a coolness that lifted something inside me. Seattle glittered softly in the distance, the water reflecting the city lights. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace that did not depend on someone else's stability. I paused near the entrance, looking back one last time at the empty hall. Then I faced forward again, ready for whatever came next. If you were standing beside me right now, I would ask you something I have asked myself 100 times. When someone finally owns their mistakes and begins to change, do you open your heart again, or do you love them from a careful distance to protect your peace? Your thoughts stay with me more than you know, so tell me in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, stay close. There is always another journey waiting to be told.